Ever since I covered my favorite fighting game protagonists, I knew I'd be covering my favorite fighting game antagonists. You need both to tell a story. In fact, the antagonist is even more important in a fighting game. While the protagonist is just one selectable fighter on a roster of many that we may never have to see, it's our destiny to face the main antagonist, since they are at the end of the arcade ladder, standing in the way of our tournament victory and a happy ending. What makes these antagonists great story-wise is they do something to alienate nearly everyone else on the roster, whether it's negatively affect their lives in some manner or simply setting up a martial arts tournament with a potential ulterior motive. From a gameplay perspective, while they could be a normal playable character on the roster, facing them feels intimidating in arcade mode, as if just looking at them is difficult. And then fighting against them feels nearly impossible, since they are either set at max AI difficulty or they have some cheap moves that are not meant to be countered with a simple punch. To be eligible for this list, the antagonist has to have been the final boss in their game's arcade or story mode in at least one entry in their series of origin, and even though they are labeled as the antagonist, they do not have to be evil. They could simply be neutral and want everything destroyed. Finally, one character per series of origin. So with all that set up, here are my top 10 fighting game antagonists. Number 10, Gargo's from Killer Instinct. He's all about dominating the world for the sake of chaos. He was the final boss of Killer Instinct 2, but he was hinted at in the first game as the Tiger Spirit telling Jago that Idol must be destroyed. With Idol being the boss of the first game, it turns out it was reckless evil fighting demonic evil, as the barbaric Idol was the only other force in Gargos' way. With that nuisance out of the way, now he was here to destroy the world. I like his antagonistic tie to the evil organization Ultratech, where he hated them for bringing his rival onto Earth before him. His first goal is to kill off Ultratech to make him the only dominant force. I guess that's one way to figure out which evil is the biggest threat. In Killer Instinct 2013, final boss Arya, built by Ultratech, opens up a portal in attempt to defeat Gargos, bringing his new, even scarier design to the fight. Come on, Ultratech, always starting trouble. His original design was just a big gargoyle. He was like Firebrand on steroids or Flintstones vitamins or something. Killer Instinct 2013 changed up various things though. This design felt like Intimidation the character. He was much more monstrous, and when you select him, he acts like he's above everything, tapping his finger on his arm waiting for you to pick him already. Old Gargos mainly used fire, but this new Gargos was much more creative, using portals and demon magic and minions. I wish this Gargos could get a chance to be the final boss again, since his powers give him that otherworldly flair that make you feel his abilities are unmatched.
Beautiful creature.
Number 9, Dural from Virtua Fighter. It's Virtua Fighter, so I can't really praise Dural for her extensive backstory, but I've always liked her for her legacy as a fighting game boss. When I was younger, Dural seemed like the coolest thing to me, since I thought her featureless face and body was intimidating, along with the fact that she had aspects of everyone's moveset on the roster in her one playstyle. It portrayed her as a master of everything, perfect to end in arcade mode with. Her ramped up difficulty truly made it feel like she's honed all of her skills and she's not just a typical jack of all trades. She was Seth many years before Seth was even a thought. When I discussed her in my Cyborgs in Fighting Games video, I compared her to Rando's introduction in Yu Yu Hakusho, where his appearance was hidden as this featureless form that had nearly 100 techniques. For both of them, building them up as these formless characters that knew all the techniques made them feel mysterious yet powerful, even though Rando wasn't that strong compared to all the other demons we eventually met. I've since learned that even though she's difficult to fight, she was actually one of the easiest characters to design, since they don't have to put detail on a character model or design new moves for her. But despite not being the most artistic character, she's not meant to be elaborate. She just gets to the point and beats your face in without all the bells and whistles.
Ring out!
Number 8, Bloody Marie from Skullgirls. Skullgirls is a game that references many fighting games and classic arcade games alongside being its own game and story.
Now you're playing with power.
So it makes sense that Marie feels like the classic quarter-stealing arcade boss throwback that we needed in 2012. She's made to be unfair, showing off more powers and obstacles the further you get in the fight. When you take down her 3 forms, you really feel like you earned it. Her first form is her surrounded by skulls, throwing hordes of skulls at you that force you to block, since if you get hit by 1, you actually get hit by at least 10. If the air skulls don't affect you, then watch your feet, since she'll have her minions from underground grab you, and then she puts up skeleton shields for good measure to make your life even more miserable. Hit her enough and she'll go into her second, more mobile form. Now she sends shadow men at you to attack you from above and below, and even the back. The other attack she gains during this form is my favorite one from the fight, being skeleton gangsters that fire machine guns. These were alongside skeleton gangsters that dive-kicked and wielded knives, showing the skeletons weren't just upgraded with weapons in this form, but clothing too. Her final form is Marie barely staying alive, reduced to a floating pile of bones surrounding the item that everyone's after, the Skull Heart. All her attacks from the previous forms are let loose, making sure everything is in your way before you defeat her, and if all that sounds simple enough, put her on nightmare mode and nothing will ever be accomplished. Marie is a sympathetic antagonist, as she was an ill-treated orphan who used the Skull Heart to grant her a wish of punishing her abusers. Any woman who makes a wish on the Skull Heart becomes the Skull Girl, who is the all-powerful minion that takes over the world for the Skull Heart. Marie is shown to be strong-willed and not wanting to be fully evil, as she still has her state of mind and is struggling to resist the Skull Heart's full influence. However, she still attacks anyone who is trying to take down the Skull Heart and anyone who is related to her enemies at the Medici Mafia. It gives her purpose to fight anyone on the roster, either out of her own self-interest or just survival. If anything though, you are doing Marie a service by beating her, since it frees her from the wicked Skull Heart, even if it results in her death. Overall, Marie has that fun, frustrating difficulty that makes you love to hate fighting her, and even though there are more powerful characters that can control time and space in the lore, Marie is a great boss to introduce us to the terrors of the Skull Girls universe. Number 7. Jeddah Doma from Darkstalkers. More than anything, Jeddah sets the stage for a boss battle with the most unsettling arena. To be blunt, you essentially fight him inside of a giant uterus when some demon that he's trying to awaken that looks like a giant fetus is pulsating and twitching with many eyeballs in the background. The stage is called Fetus of God to confirm your unsettled fears. This thing is part of Jeddah's grand plan to create the perfect life form by fusing all souls in the realm that he deems flawless. The creepy nature of his stage fits with his playstyle, which involves dismembering himself and using his blood as a weapon. He loves to drag you down with his blood hands from the ground, or make you sign a contract of death with all of your blood. Despite how gruesome his moveset and stage are, his face is not. They made him strangely attractive for a fish man. I mean, for a whatever Jeddah is. Comparing Jeddah to Pyron, the boss of the first 2 games, Jeddah definitely seems more involved with the game's narrative. With Pyron, he's just a planet-hoarding alien who wants to add Earth to his collection. It just so happens that this version of Earth has a bunch of cool creatures, with a conflict between the Darkstalkers and the Hunters, and a struggle between families to take over the Demon Throne, none of which Pyron is involved with. Jeddah, on the other hand, is more directly involved with the character's conflicts. He was one of the nobles of the Makai, or Demon World, so he had a connection to Morgan's father Belial, who was also a noble. He knew Morgan's power and was the one that released the personification of the rest of her power, Lilith. He drags the other characters to the fight when he attempts to merge everyone's homeworlds to create a new realm devoid of any conflict. He wants to destroy the world because he hates what it has become rather than just for chaos. He actually could have been a more complex villain if Darkstalkers didn't just end at the 3rd game and developed him more. Of all things, the Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite Story Mode showed us a glimpse of his redeemable nature when Morgan tells Jeddah that he's not in his right mind when he's up to his soul-stealing ways again. The way she says it, it makes it sound like they had some sort of resolution off-screen after Darkstalkers 3. If only all that extra Darkstalkers media from the 90s came out after Jeddah was introduced, maybe we could have gotten to see another side of the Makai noble. Number 6. Ogre from Tekken. Tekken's plot mainly revolves around the Mishima family, so we've seen the final boss switch from Heihachi to Kazuya, then back to Heihachi, and even Heihachi's revived father. Yet despite all that, I still view Ogre as the most iconic antagonist in the series. There's just something that makes him stand out as the big bad, even though he was only the main villain in one game. For final bosses like Heihachi and Kazuya, they've spent time as the main characters and still act like humans when emotions come into play, sometimes. I still view them more as immoral protagonists since the story revolves around their plans, it just means they're not good role models. Ogre, on the other hand, lacks that human element that makes him a self-serving, cold-blooded killer, since he uses a combination of moves from characters that were not on the original Tekken 3 roster. It's assumed that he attacks and attempts to kill fighters to take the best parts of their fighting style. And a big emphasis on the phrase attempts to kill, since nearly every fighter missing and supposedly dead because of Ogre in Tekken 3 appeared in a later canon game. I'm not sure what his ultimate goal is, since killing off all the strong fighters to take their powers means he's not gonna have anyone to fight with all those techniques he just stole. He intends to steal these attacks while in his base humanoid form known as Ancient Ogre, but if you put up a good fight, he'll get more serious with his monstrous form True Ogre. Now with extra fire, I guess Ogre's main accomplishment was getting together the new generation of fighters in Tekken 3 by targeting their family or masters who were playable in the first two games. And isn't that all we need from a final boss? The unity created by mutual hatred. Even though he was only in one main series game, he did his job right. Plus, he got to show off in more non-canon spin-off games, so you get more Ogre without all the canonical murder. Number 5. Hazama from BlazBlue. Hazama is evil with no remorse for his actions, so he's a character that's hate-worthy by nature. He may pretend to be your ally, but that's only to manipulate you into helping him. He likes ruining your life as much as he can for his own amusement and experimentation. His goal through all this torment is to feel the mental pain of his victim, which is a feeling that he lacks, so I guess he doesn't just do this all for the chaos. He cannot feel this pain due to initially being a vessel for the big villain Terumi, but when Terumi's soul was being transferred, there was a problem, causing Hazama to take a mind of his own. Now he shares the body with Terumi, before they were eventually separated in a later game. When fighting final boss Hazama, he lets you suffer right next to him in BlazBlue Continuum Shift's arcade mode, where he has the circle of death around him to create proximity damage. Other than that, his insane boss mode was difficult due to the maximized AI, so nothing new for his moveset compared to when he's a selectable character on the main roster. He's all about summoning snakes and more snakes. It makes sense because a snake is the most untrustworthy animal, right next to the weasel. However, a moveset based around weasels would have been too awkward, so they went with the snake. Plus, weasels redeemed themselves briefly with the advent of I Am Weasel in the 90s. But anyway, Hazama, he's cool and a great dresser, but don't trust him.
Eternal coils of the dragon serpent! Well then, Noel, shall we?
Number 4. Geese Howard from Fatal Fury. Geese Howard feels like the villain of a classic martial arts film. He killed the main character's father, the main character seeks revenge on Geese. Geese sits at the top of the underground crime scene and sends a bunch of fighters to stand in the way of the main character. And then the main character reaches him for the final showdown. There you go, perfect plot for a Tony Jaa film. His role as a classic martial arts movie antagonist even reflects in his moveset, which uses a form of jujitsu. It's a no-nonsense fighting style that relies on his pure strength and skill rather than some otherworldly power. He means business and wants to show off his power, which is basically the reason he was kicked out of the training school of Tung Fu Ru. Tung sensed evil in Geese's heart, so Geese spent his time after being let go rising in the ranks of an underground crime syndicate. Then he used his influence and power to kill Jeff Bogard, his former training partner that Tung liked. Heh, that'll show Tung for calling Geese evil. Wait a minute. The cool thing about seeing Geese as the final boss in Fatal Fury is that he was the sub-boss in Art of Fighting 2, which takes place place in the same universe before the events of Fatal Fury. It shows Geese before he rose to the top, working under the former Kingpin, Mr. Big. And of course, Geese murdering Jeff causes Jeff's son and Fatal Fury protagonist Terry Bogard to seek revenge as mentioned earlier. Geese's downfall was mostly his own fault, as Terry used the King of Fighters tournament that Geese held as a way to get to Geese without having to go all undercover. And when Terry defeated Geese at the top of Howard Tower, Geese did not accept Terry's offer to help him up. Geese slapped the hand away and fell to his death. Either that's accepting your loss poorly or accepting it really well and committing to the fight to the death aspect. Number 3, Nightmare from Soul Calibur. Nightmare is the wielder of the wicked sword Soul Edge. For being the main evil force in the series, the hardest antagonist criteria for him to fill was being the actual final boss. He wasn't a final boss until Soul Calibur 4 in some character story modes, with Algol being the default final boss in that game. His monster form Night Terror was also a secret final boss in Soul Calibur 3, but usually when Soul Edge was involved, the final boss was Inferno. This fiery boy is Soul Edge in its human-like form after Nightmare has collected enough souls to release him, but Inferno never really had a personality or unique moveset, so Nightmare always felt like he was the true villain. Nightmare is essentially Inferno before he can take his own form, using someone else's body as a vessel. In Soul Calibur 1 and 2, he uses Siegfried's body, one of the protagonists that defeated him in the first game. Soul Calibur 3 and 4 had Nightmare revived by Inferno himself, using the empty armor as a puppet after Siegfried rid his body of Soul Edge and discarded the armor. With Nightmare dead after Soul Calibur 4, Soul Calibur 5 had a crazy guy who just wanted Nightmare back as the new vessel, which was really the developer saying, "It's a Soul Calibur game, we had to bring Nightmare back, that's like having a game without Taki, that's like having a game without Songmi, that's like having a game without Mitsurugi, that's what we meant." Then Soul Calibur 6 started it all over again with the Siegfried Nightmare. Across all these versions of Nightmare, he's had that fear factor you want with an antagonist. He's always been shrouded in dark armor with his face unseen. Red glowing eyes are the only thing that's visible. And he drags around his giant sword, which has an eyeball on it. That's pretty creepy, man. And of course he intimidates with that massive monster hand. He looks cool to us in the real world, but if we existed in the Soul Calibur universe, I think we'd want to avoid him at all costs. That's reflected in his moveset, which combines him demanding fear and using savagery. While Siegfried relies on technique from years of training, Nightmare trades that skill for power. He barbarically swings his blade and stabs his opponents brutally. He adds in some dark magic for good measure to remind you that you're not just sparring with basic weapons, you're fighting for your life against powers that you can't even fathom.
None shall be able to stop me.
Number 2, M. Bison from Street Fighter, also known as Vega in Japan and Dictator to avoid all confusion. Where do you even start with Bison? He was created to be the classic take over the world villain in all its cheesy glory. A man dressed like this has no other plans except to enslave all of Earth's population. He bolsters that point by having an organization named Shadaloo with an emblem that's a skull with wings and a lightning bolt. His face is also not what you'd expect from a trustworthy individual, but it is from someone who brushes their teeth every day. And his power is basically just evil power. No explanation has really been given, other than that it's called psycho power. He's one of the few individuals who can control it, and it can destroy many things with ease, including Bison himself. His body falls apart constantly since he cannot contain all his psycho power. Each game implies he's in a new body that just so happens to look like his previous body, but he saves a bunch of brainwashed people and robot-like dudes to be his new body eventually. The psycho power is involved in many of his attacks, where he only gives us a small taste of it, whether it's in projectile form, from his punches, or just covering his entire body with his iconic Psycho Crusher. He can also amplify his power, seen in super moves, to give us a much more lethal dose. His other main attacks are usually foot-based, like him hopping on your head, which is perfect for how arrogant he is. There's also his multiple knee press attacks. It always felt kinda random to me that this energy-wielding dictator uses basic leg presses. He looks like he's having a hoot when he does it though, so I guess it's fine by me. Bison embraces his evil with how much he's affected the lives of other big players in the Street Fighter story. He wants to recruit Ryu through any means necessary. He killed Nash, causing Guile to seek vengeance. He killed Chun-Li's father, causing her to seek vengeance. He manipulated Sagat's anger at Ryu. He killed Juri's father and gouged out her eye. He brainwashed Cammy to do his bidding and had plans to take over her body, and then the list goes on. Some just want to see him defeated because he's evil, while others loathe every second that he's alive. Finally, what makes Bison great is how well he's portrayed in all media. The games always gave him the best voice and lines in any language. I feel like anything he says in battle is fun to quote with him.
Kneel before my psycho power.
Outside the game, the anime movie made him crass yet devious, planning the whole violent Ken plot and showing no regrets about saying Ryu is better than Sagat right in front of Sagat's face. Even Street Fighter's inaccurate live-action movie made Bison the star of the show, hamming it up and being somewhat suave and verbose, with his famous "It was Tuesday" line being put in an actual game.
For me, it was a Tuesday.
And that Bison personality transferred over to the USA cartoon, which I love for the campiness. All in all, Bison finds a way to take a cliché villain template and make it work with a fun playstyle and campy yet threatening presence.
This place shall become your grave!
For the honorable mentions, I'll give you my 20 through 11 countdown, since there were a lot of potential choices that I liked. The 1 per series of origin rule still applies. Number 20, Dio from World Heroes. Number 19, Kagami from The Last Blade. Number 18, Abyss from Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Number 17, Hayao Imawano from Rival Schools. Number 16, Zion the Unborn from Bloody Roar. Number 15, Dictator Superman from Injustice. Number 14, Raidou from Dead or Alive. Number 13, Ino from Guilty Gear. Number 12, Amakusa from Samurai Showdown. And number 11, Rugal Bernstein from King of Fighters. Bonus round, here are antagonists left off due to the 1 per series of origin restriction from the main 10. Idol and Arya from Killer Instinct, Pyron from Darkstalkers, Algol and Inferno from Soul Calibur, Jinpachi, Kazumi, Devil and Heihachi to an extent from Tekken. Krauser from Fatal Fury, and Gil and Seth from Street Fighter. For number 1, I chose a villain that has a high difficulty curve, strong backstory, and presence that makes you realize you might be screwed when you see you have to fight him atop the arcade ladder. Number 1, Shao Kahn from Mortal Kombat. Shao Kahn is the original unfair fighting game boss. In his final boss appearances, Mortal Kombat set its mechanics and then made sure Shao Kahn would break at least half of them. Besides the unfair input reading that his AI would do in older games, some of his moves were armored, meaning he could just attack you without having to worry about hit stun from your attacks. But his moves caused lots of hit stun, meaning you had to be very careful when you decided to go on the offensive, since his armor lasted a long time in some cases. You were no longer playing Mortal Kombat, you were playing Shao Kahn's game. Some of your moves were even disabled against Shao Kahn in the older games. Input them and nothing happens. And then he rubs it in your face that he beat you by cheating the game with his pretty cool voice.
I win.
Unfair tactics aside, he has a pretty varied moveset in his appearances. His main weapon is a Warhammer, which fits his big hulking design.
Shao Kahn wins.
Sometimes he swings it, sometimes he throws it and stuns you and throws it again, and sometimes he shows off his whack-a-mole skills. He can also just muscle his way through you with shoulder charges and kicks. His last basic type of move is where he uses green energy, which I could see as some sort of magic. He uses it to make spears or just balls. If it is magic, it relates to how Shao Kahn is much more than how he appears. While he has that daunting appearance of an Adonis body with a warlord skull helmet that leaves his angry red eyes visible and the occasional cape, he is much more than a brute that just smashes whatever's in front of him. He's both a brilliant strategist and has some magic abilities. Some of these details vary depending on if you go by the original or rebooted timeline, but it all started with Shao Kahn serving as an advisor for Outworld's previous ruler, Onaga. After helping Onaga build up Outworld, Shao Kahn poisoned him so he could take the throne. With this new power, he conquered many other realms, building his army and expanding Outworld to have more people to rule over. His biggest accomplishment was merging Edenia with Outworld and taking Queen Sindel and Princess Kitana as his wife and daughter respectively. After Sindel's suicide, Shao Kahn had the plan to bury her in Earthrealm. This would allow him to invade it in order to retrieve his wife after her resurrection without breaking the rules of winning the Mortal Kombat tournament to merge her realm with Outworld. That is a very complex and clever plan by the Emperor, especially since resurrecting Sindel would mean that she's a mind-controlled puppet for him, and between all of this, we saw some of his knowledge of sorcery, like creating warriors of his own. Ermac, for example, was Shao Kahn's own creation using souls that he gathered over time. MK9 did retcon some of these elements, like making Sindel's resurrection Quan Chi's idea and only using her as a powerful warrior without all those extra perks. But at least he's smart enough to surround himself with the right people who betray him. Not my best logic. Regardless, Shao Kahn earned his spot as a main antagonist with his combination of power, cunning, a cool voice, and an authority that commands you to bow to the Emperor.
Shao Kahn wins. Fatality.
So, what did you think? Agree? Disagree? What other fighting game antagonists deserve a spot on the fighting game wall of infamy? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next video.